So first of all, I want to say a warm welcome to everybody who's joined us this afternoon for this webinar around the BBC 500 Words competition. I'm Sarah Mears. I'm the Programme Manager for Libraries Connected. And just a bit of housekeeping from me, really. We are recording this afternoon session, so if you don't want to be on the recording, then feel free to keep your mics off. But at the same time, if you're happy to have your mic or your mics and your camera on, that would be great, because it means that when speakers are speaking, there's actually someone they can see listening to them. So that's really nice. And if you could keep your mics off during the presentations, that would be brilliant. I've got my colleague Emma Daniel here as well today. She's doing all the tech stuff for us from Libraries Connected. And we'd just like to say, if you've got any questions as we go through the session this afternoon, please do put them in the chat. There will be a little bit of time at the end of the session for questions and answers. So I think that's probably all of the housekeeping today. We will film it, so we'll be able to share the recording of it with you after the event, and any links that we talk about during the session this afternoon. We wanted to have this session because Libraries Connected are part of the 500 Words strategy group, and we thought actually libraries are really important partners for the 500 Words competition. We know how important creative writing is, and there are concerns about creative writing, and yet with the 500 Words competition, you get this kind of explosion of wonderful stories. Librarians, along with teachers, are judges of the competition, but we also think libraries have a great role to play in terms of helping children start their stories, giving opportunities in libraries for that kind of story activity to go on, which really stimulates children's writing and creativity. And what I love about the 500 Words competition, I've been a judge a couple of times now, is it's not about the spelling and the grammar, it's about the creativity and the imagination, which makes it really special. So I'm here today with BBC colleagues, so Matt Dean, Tom O'Brien, and Chris, Chris Moore, who are going to be talking about the competition. We've also got some library colleagues who have been judges, so we'll be talking to them about what it's like to be a judge. And we're also joined by Dr. Rebecca Lawrence from Oxford University Press, who actually do analysis of the stories every year. I have this huge bank of story analysis that she's going to share with us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tom O'Brien from the BBC, who's going to talk a bit about the 500 Words competition.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to everyone for joining us. As Sarah said, we're thrilled to have Libraries Connected as one of our partners. We can't run this competition without our partners. Oxford University Press, we'll hear from later, one of our partners as well. And this competition thrives and survives thanks to the brilliant enthusiasm, support and generosity of our partners. So we're thrilled to be working together on this year's competition again. For those who don't know, BBC 500 Words is the UK's biggest children's story writing competition, and we are back again opening for entries this September. The competition has been running since 2011 now, and in that time we have now had over 1 million stories submitted. In 2023, when the competition came back and returned to the BBC, organised by the Department of Children's and Education, BBC Teach, we had 44,000 entries last year. We've got some big supporters, not just Libraries Connected, but also Her Majesty the Queen, who very kindly hosted us at Buckingham Palace for the final last year. And as well as not being able to run the competition without our partners, we also can't do it without our brilliant volunteer judges. As Sarah said, we'll hear from a couple in a moment, and I'll speak a little bit later about how you're able to get involved with that side of things as well. Again, for those who don't know 500 Words particularly well, the competition essentially invites children in 2 age categories, that's 5 to 7 and 8 to 11, to write a story that they would love to read. That's a line that you'll hear quite a lot across our 500 Words communications. It came from our friends at World Book Day, and it's something that's really important. Write the story that you would love to read. There's no theme, there's no prescribed route that they need to take. It just has to be their own story, and as you may have guessed, 500 words or less. Writers are free to take existing characters from fiction or the real world and use them in their pieces, but stories can't be a simple retelling of an existing tale. What we do want to see, and what our volunteer judges really want to see, is creativity. As Sarah mentioned, spelling, punctuation and grammar are not marked. It really is just about that idea and bringing it to life. People ask us, why do we focus on that side of things? Why, when we're an education department, do we not go in on wanting things to be grammatically correct? And I think it's because even though 500 Words offers our winners some incredible prizes and experiences, what we really want our young writers to experience is the joy of reading and writing. Sarah touched upon it, that we know that the enthusiasm for writing is in decline at the moment. And another one of our partners on 500 Words is the National Literacy Trust. And I think last month they released a report showing that enthusiasm for writing for pleasure was at an all-time low. Now, hold on, I'm going to give some quite upsetting numbers here, but fewer than 3 in 10 children said that they enjoy writing in their free time. And just to put that into context, that's a decrease of over 18% in the last 14 years. It's a drop of 5.9% in the last year alone. The NLT study showed that all groups of young people were becoming disengaged, but it was most pronounced for boys in Key Stage 1. Just 1 in 9 children write something daily in their free time. That's quite a sobering stat. It was around 1 in 5 a year earlier. But all hope is not lost. Those who do enjoy writing give us some enthusiasm. Whereas less than 3 in 10 enjoy writing for pleasure at home, more than half said that creative writing was something they enjoyed at school. And of those who are writing at home, they told us that they did it to be creative, to express their ideas and imagination, and to share their thoughts and feelings. 40% of children said they wrote because they thought it helped to improve their mental well-being. And a third said they did it simply because it made them happy. Now, people often ask us, why does the BBC do a children's writing competition? But I think everything I've just said there really demonstrates why it's so important. It's public service broadcasting at its best to be involved in something like this. There is that worrying decline, and we would love to play a small part in reversing that trend, while also providing a really great outlet for those who do enjoy it. So we're working hard to reach those children who don't believe that writing is for them. We're trying some non-traditional routes in this year's competition. We're engaging with a number of sporting organisations who have got those outreach opportunities, will help to promote the competition and encourage entries. We're also trying to remove some of those barriers, as I mentioned, by not focusing on spelling, punctuation and grammar. 500 Words has always been for children from all abilities and all backgrounds. And this year, we're really pleased to be able to say that each school that enters a story that receives 50% free school meals or more will be entitled to a £50 National Book Token for the school and 3 £10 book tokens for their pupils. Now, we've got a chance now to see a film with one of our incredible winners from last year's competition. I must say at this point, although for licensing and consent purposes, if you're watching this back on demand, we're unable to include the film, but you can watch it on the BBC 500 Words website at bbc.co.uk/500 words, and we will include links to that as well. Spend the opportunity now. We were going to talk about why Spencer's was chosen, but I think it's almost quite self-explanatory. It's such a brilliantly written story. Hugh didn't mention there, Spencer's dyslexic, and he very almost didn't submit his story. And we almost missed out on hearing such a brilliant tale, which I'm not sure yet if Tesco are using as part of a marketing campaign. Spencer didn't enjoy writing at all. He didn't think writing was for him and didn't think 500 Words was for him in any way, shape or form. But a teacher spotted his creative side and encouraged him to give it a go. And thank goodness they did. Spencer said his story was inspired by a video game that his mum won't let him play, which is about a bank heist, that his brain is always full of random ideas and he doesn't know how they get in there. And when he read it to his dad and his brother, they thought it was hilarious. Charlie Higson is one of our judges on the panel and is returning again for this year's competition. And in judging the story, what he said was what he loved about The Scottish Gangster was that the author clearly had a huge amount of fun writing it and really enjoyed telling the story. They didn't worry about whether they were telling it in the proper way, whether their teachers or parents would like it. It was like they were telling a funny story to a friend. It had so much character in it, and there was always something funny happening in every line. You can see that story in its unabridged version, the way that Spencer wrote it. And there are spelling mistakes in there, and there are punctuation mistakes in there. But you can see that that didn't detract from a brilliant and enthusiastic story that he told. And he richly deserved to receive his prize at the competition last year. To let you know, Spencer now has much more confidence in writing and has his own ideas book, which he uses to create more stories. And his mum says she sees so much more confidence in him since taking part in the competition. And that is exactly what BBC 500 Words is all about. We'll move on now to talking about judges. And as I said earlier, we couldn't run 500 Words without our judges. We receive 44,000 stories, and every single one of those is read by a volunteer judge in the first round. To be a judge, you need to be a teacher, teaching assistant, or librarian. Getting involved is really simple. We'll be opening our judges portal on the 500 Words website at the end of the summer. When you sign up, you need to provide the name of a referee who can verify that you're able to mark the work of 5 to 11-year-olds. And after that, you can just wait until the competition closes in November and you'll get your stories to mark. The system we use to submit stories is a very sophisticated piece of kit. It will automatically assign each judge a batch of 10 stories once the competition closes. They're all randomly allocated and anonymized, but we also make sure that judges don't receive stories from their own local area. So you won't accidentally get a story from someone from a class or group that you're involved with. Don't worry, the system, the way it's set up, means that you can submit a story and be a judge at the same time. Stories are marked on 5 criteria: characterization, plot, originality, language, and enjoyment. Once you get through your 10 stories, you can ask for more. We do find that a lot of our judges have enjoyed reading them so much they can't wait to get another batch. We may also ask for some super judges at the end of the marking period. This is for any stories that we haven't managed to be marked during the marking period. No story will go unloved in 500 Words. We can't and won't move on to the next round until they have all been read. So we may ask for volunteers to help us mop up those last few. Please keep an eye out for your emails if you do sign up for that, and also to see if you've been randomly selected, as we will get one of our judges an invitation to our grand final following a random draw. The work of our judges helps to whittle those entries down to just 5,000 who make it through to the second round, which is then judged by another of our partners, the Reading Agency. They'll get that list down to 50, and then it's on to our celebrity judging panel to get the stories down to bronze, silver, and gold winners in each age group. But a story that you read in the first round could go on to be the winner of the overall competition. So to recap, you can sign up to be a judge from late summer. Sarah said that she'll send a note out to confirm that date when we have it. And you can do that on our website, which is bbc.co.uk/500 words. That's bbc.co.uk/500 words. We can never have too many judges. We'd love to have you on board. Thank you to anyone who has judged before and to anyone who signs up again this year. I'll hand back to Sarah now.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Thank you. But I love that Spencer film. It just makes me laugh every time I watch it, and just so brilliantly read as well. I was lucky enough to be at the final and just having an amazing array of celebrities reading children's work was just awe-inspiring, actually, and just, yeah, so powerful. And the stories were all so different as well. I think that was the interesting thing. So some were quite dark, some were really funny. It was just a really, really powerful exemplification of the minds of all these wonderful children. And I also, as I said at the beginning, was a judge, and being a judge, I think it's been really, really eye-opening for me as well. And I have to say that the website that you get access to as a judge really makes it easy. I was really impressed with the access and ease of the website this year. But I really want to talk to 2 library judges today. We've got Emma Davis from Halton, hopefully she had a few problems with her connection, but fingers crossed she's okay. And also Erin Hamilton from Suffolk Libraries. So welcome to Emma and Erin, and thank you for volunteering to talk about being a judge. So I really wanted to ask you both, first of all, why did you volunteer to be a judge? Perhaps I'll start with Erin and then go on to Emma.
Yeah, so I volunteered to be a judge sort of several years ago now. It had just been highlighted to me by somebody that I worked with in a school, and it was just this exciting opportunity that I just couldn't pass up to read children's work from around the country and to give them that opportunity. So as soon as I got that email to say, oh, would you like to be a judge, I signed up immediately, and then every opportunity since I've taken it.
What about you, Emma?
It was my first time actually last year. I saw the opportunity and thought, you know, that sounds really nice. I had heard something about the statistics around children being reluctant to write under, you know, sort of under their own steam and feeling like it was a bit of a chore that had to be done at school. So I thought, if there's any way that I can help to sort of support children to be creative and to share stories, then I was really just keen to do that.
Okay. And what do you think personally that you get from being a judge? That's Erin.
It's a good question. I think I mean, I read children's literature all the time. I'm sort of fully immersed in children's stories. But what I've always loved is discovering new voices. And I think with children, sort of what Tom was saying about the reluctance to write and, you know, to be worried about grammar, spelling and punctuation. I think this is just a really lovely way to get children writing. 500 words is really easy to read. And I find, like Tom said, you don't know whether you've read that story in the first instance and it's gone on to one. It's quite an exciting factor to think about.
Thank you. And Emma, what about you? What have you got from your first time as a judge?
I just really enjoyed it. I think initially I wasn't really sure
Oh, Emma, we've lost.
how much of
Sorry, Emma, we've
a commitment
we keep
it would be,
losing you. Can we come back to you, Emma, in a minute? I'll try you again.
but I found that the whole process was just more enjoyable than I wasn't doing it during work time. I was sort of saving it. So
Oh, we've lost Emma again. Poor Emma, she's been struggling with her internet connection, manfully, womanfully trying to keep going. But Erin, I'll come to you about what's the commitment? How did you find the commitment to doing this?
I mean, it's not a big commitment. It's really enjoyable. Like Tom had mentioned, you get allocated 10 stories. So at 500 words each, it's not, you know, hugely onerous task. And I did find in my first year or two, I did keep requesting to read more. I was enjoying them so much. So yeah, it's just, you know, an evening to read through them. And I think with 500 words, you've got that opportunity to really read them properly, and to make sure that you're scoring them fairly, you know, according to lost my word, categories that you want to sort of measure against. And when I did keep requesting more, it was because I had time and I wanted to dedicate time to it because I felt it was a really important initiative.
And just while I've got you as well, obviously it's really nice to have librarians, it to be a judging panel that's made up of librarians, teachers and teaching assistants. What do you think librarians bring to the judging process? And why should librarians particularly get involved?
Well, I think if any librarian similar to me and reads sort of solely children's literature, then it is that really good opportunity to just discover new content, new ideas, so much excitement. And with 500 words, it almost just sort of sparks that what could happen next. So I think librarians just bring to the table, you know, that understanding of children's literature, the stories, the sort of patterns, but actually we have a different set of time as well than teachers. Teachers are quite busy, teaching assistants are really busy. I'm not saying librarians aren't, we are, but actually this is something that I highly prioritize as part of my work. I think it's really vital just to get involved.
Yeah, I'd agree, and sort of build skills as well that you can transfer to other parts of your work with children in libraries.
Absolutely. It's just a nice way to encourage. So we would promote it through Suffolk Libraries for children just to get involved. And, you know, moving forward, it's something that we could look at. Do we have a little 500 words writing club just to give children the space and time? You know, home lives are very different for children, and, you know, giving them access to entering could be something that we get involved with. Would be very happy to.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because at the end of this, when we have the Q&A, and I can see some questions coming in, which is brilliant. So thank you for those and keep them coming. But one of the questions we have for you is, what could libraries do more, not just to be judges, but to promote the competition and to support children in in their families writing as well as in schools. So so do think about that and do share any ideas you've got in the chat. And thanks to Erin. I think we seem to have lost poor Emma altogether, but thanks to Emma as well for what she was able to contribute. And yeah, thanks to Erin, and I guess you'll be signing up to be a judge again this year, Erin.
Definitely, can't wait.
So I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Rebecca Lawrence from Oxford University Press, who has created the 500 words report, which is on the BBC's website as well, and really interesting to read the report in its full. But it's just developed some really fascinating insights through analysing the stories and about the children's lives and what they're thinking about and concerned about right now. So I'm going to hand over to Becky, who's going to share her findings with us.
Thank you very much. Yes, so Oxford University Press are very pleased to be the official language partners of BBC 500 Words. And I think we've been involved since way back in 2011. And each year we release a language report, as you mentioned, based on our analysis of the stories. And the way we do that is that all the stories are collected together and they're added to the Oxford Children's Corpus, which is the largest database of children's English language in the world. It includes over 500 million words, including all the stories from 10 years of the 500 Words competition. Because we add new words each year into the corpus, it means that it's a growing and an up-to-date record of children's language over time. And this makes the corpus a really unique and valuable resource. And here at OUP, we can then analyse the language data in the corpus to then understand more about children's language. So the sort of things that we might look at include how children's language changes over time, new words that children are using that year, or re-emerging word trends that are coming back. We can see words that the children are finding difficult to spell. And also we can see common issues with grammar and punctuation and things like that. And all these sorts of findings we can use to inform the products and the platforms that we make. So then we know that we're supporting children in the best way possible to develop their language and linguistic skills. It also means that we can ensure that our range of children's dictionaries are age appropriate and up to date, as language continues to change over time. So we're constantly updating. And we're also able to analyse what children are actually writing about. So, for instance, I'll talk in a little bit about the impact of current affairs on children's writing. And we can look at what children of different ages are writing about and across different regions of the UK as well. So all of this together means that we can get some really important insights into the sorts of things that are inspiring children, how they're processing the world around them, and then the ways that they then express this in their writing. And these are the sorts of findings that we present in our language report. So as ever, the stories from 2023 last year revealed some fascinating insights about children's interests and their concerns and their thoughts. We can see influence from current affairs, from cultural trends, different societal attitudes, and I'll talk a little bit about each of those. Starting with current affairs, we can definitely see the impact of global conflicts in children's writing. So words like Gaza, Ukraine, Israel, and Palestine were all used much more frequently in stories from 2023 than from 2020, which is the last year that the competition ran. And many of these stories really convey children's empathy really well. So, for instance, they might describe what it might be like to be a child who's caught up in a conflict, or some of them might imagine the experience of a Ukrainian refugee who's going to school in the UK. The theme of royalty occurred a lot in the stories as well last year. The word coronation was used nearly twice as frequently in 2023 as in 2020. So that shows that children's writing was being inspired by the coronation that had taken place earlier that year. And words like King and Charles and Camilla were all more frequent in 2023 than in 2020. And the stories from 2023 were actually the first to engage with a lived experience of COVID and the pandemic and the lockdowns. And even a few years on, all of these themes do still appear in the stories, which I suppose unsurprisingly, but it does suggest that they have made a real mark on children's view of the world. Some of the children use the pandemic as a sort of reference point. So we see phrases like before COVID, since COVID, during COVID. And some of the stories imagine new lockdowns as the result of other imagined threats, like, well, there's one about monsters invading and a lockdown there. And there's one story that has a character who is obsessed with toilet paper since the pandemic. Last year, we saw that AI and artificial intelligence were both more frequent in stories than in 2020. And we actually saw that there were more mentions in relation to AI being like a dangerous entity that might take over the world, which contrasts with earlier stories where AI was more like an assistant. And lots of the AI-related stories involve time travel or are set in a dystopian future. And that's actually quite a popular technique in children's writing. We also saw that some stories about the environment and climate change were also set in an imagined future. So, for instance, where the planet has suffered catastrophic damage because humans ignored earlier warnings about climate change. Other stories about the climate feature activism and campaigning, and these really highlight young writers' demands for action. Interestingly, the most common word used in sentences together with climate change is stop, which really shows children's determination to alter the course of the crisis. And this is consistent with findings from the additional research that we have carried out for Oxford Children's Word of the Year, which last year was climate change. We also see influence from cultural trends. So last year, following the release of the Barbie movie during the summer, we see that the word Barbie occurs twice as frequently in 2023 than in 2020. And there are some clear references to the film as well in the stories. We see Weird Barbie and Barbie Land coming up. Football, of course, was really big. The word football itself was more frequent in 2023 than in 2020. And following the success of the England women's football team, the word lioness saw an increase as well. Back in 2020, almost all mentions of the word lioness were references to the animal. But by 2023, over half of the mentions were in reference to football. And the lionesses are obviously quite a big source of inspiration for many of the writers. We see phrases like embrace your inner lioness coming up. And there are lots of stories which directly challenge the idea that girls can't play football. And there are story titles as well, which express a wish to make football more inclusive. There's one called Football is for Everyone. And inclusivity is definitely seen in across lots of the stories. We see themes around neurodiversity coming up. For instance, the word autism and ADHD are both more frequent in 2023 than in 2020. And some of these stories do present the challenges associated with these conditions. Also, others really highlight the strengths or describe them as superpowers. And we see some really inclusive story titles like Don't Be Nervous, Autism is Normal, and The Autism Gang. So overall, you can really see that children are absolutely engaging with the wider world. They're showing concern for others, and they're also having the opportunity to express their own interests and opinions on these matters as well. The stories do also offer a really brilliant showcase for children's skills in creative writing and different techniques. For instance, we see some really brilliant new similes that they've created. For instance, as suddenly as a British downpour, fur as soft as a dandelion clock, and as dark as a raven flying across the misty night sky. We see use of some really long words, some of the longest words in the English language, which really showcases those writers' vocabulary knowledge and the breadth of their vocabulary. And other writers create their own long words. For instance, some invent new dinosaur names, which are really long. And there's word creativity as well around social media. So we see the invention of Blip Blop and Insta spam accounts in the stories. Lots of the story openers, so the sentences at the very beginning of the story, demonstrate some brilliant writing techniques as well. Some of them directly address the reader. For instance, there's one called Have You Ever Heard of Nessie? Some use onomatopoeia really effectively. There's one that begins click, the radio buzzed into life. And lots of the stories use really evocative descriptions of their settings, which then instantly transport the reader to another place or another time. The story titles themselves are brilliant as well. Some of them use questions to entice the reader in. There's one called Who Will Be Next? And some use really effective use of alliteration. For instance, there's a story called Emma's Elemental Exercise. And lots of them have quite a humorous twist as well. There's one called Super Bagel and the Attack of the Treacherous Donut. And others offer a twist on reality. There's one called The Non-Extinction of the Dinosaurs. And some draw inspiration from other pre-existing stories as well. Like there's one called The Mad Hatter, The Legacy of Whimsy. So as you can see, the stories really display a huge range of creative writing techniques and skills from these young writers. They're drawing inspiration from culture and from society and from other well-known familiar stories. And then they're blending in their own individuality and their imagination and their linguistic creativity. And yeah, it's always just such a joy to see.
Thanks, Becky.
Thanks.
Brilliant. That's such a it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? The kind of the range of stories, and it feels like you really want to kind of share that back with educators and librarians to understand all of this that's going on in children's heads and how we can kind of activate more children to be involved.
Absolutely.
So we've got a nice little time now for question and answer sessions. So if everyone would be willing to just, all the speakers be willing to respond to some of those questions. Becky, I was just going to ask you really as a quick question before we start about, have you noticed a change in the tone of stories? Our children, I mean, we know there's lots of concerns around children's mental health, for example, and anxiety increasing post-lockdown. Have you kind of sensed that there being any kind of change? Are stories getting darker, or do you think there's the range that there always was in terms of stories?
I mean, the number of stories that we see, there's always a real range. So as you were mentioning earlier, the stories can cover all kinds of breadth of topics. But what we definitely do see every year is that current affairs and big events that year, and to some extent, I suppose, the mood of the nation in some ways, you can see those coming through from the stories. So that children are obviously really switched on with what's going on in the news and in the wider world. And with the COVID pandemic as well, as I said, because there was a bit of a gap since the competition last ran, even now a few years on, these stories were the first to come out since children had really lived through the pandemic, and even a few years on, there is still a theme that was coming up. So yeah, you can definitely pick up on what children are really drawing inspiration from, and it can be darker themes and more serious themes as well. Absolutely.
If I can just jump in at that point as well, just to say that when you're a judge, you do get obviously all the stories have to be submitted by an adult, so a child won't be submitting something that no adult has seen. But there is also a mechanism in there for judges. If you see some content that you are concerned about from a welfare point of view, there is the opportunity for you to flag that to us, and that can go through a number of checks from our point of view, and will potentially even lead to an intervention where we'll contact individuals either through the school or through the parents, depending on who submitted the story, just to check on the welfare of the children as well that are involved in that. So that we do see some themes that can verge on being pretty disturbing at some points as well, but we do have some safeguarding measures that have been designed by the experts in that field in children's and education to ensure that children can receive the level of support and protection from us while submitting their stories.
Thanks, Tom. And Tom, could you talk just a little bit about the website and how it works when you get your stories?
Yes, to an extent, because I haven't actually seen it yet. It's offline at the moment I've only joined the project this year. It's offline at the moment for a few minor upgrades, but we've been designed it to look as user-friendly as possible for you. So once you do sign up, you'll get access to a little mini site in there, which has a series of tips and guides on how to mark your stories, with some tips from our celebrity panel in there as well, the sort of things that they're looking for in the winning stories. The stories that you're there to mark are sort of effectively in an inbox for you within that system, so that you can take a look through there. And then there are it's designed not to be overly complicated with lots of different fields, so that you can just tick a box effectively or push a button to request extra stories if you get through yours. There's also an opportunity, because we know that life can get in the way sometimes, where you may not be able to finish looking at your stories. So there is an option for you to return them as well if you don't think you're going to get through the ones that you've got there, and send them back, and then other judges are able to pick those ones up and mop those up if you don't get through them.
One of the bits that I really liked about the website was actually the ability to compare stories. I don't know if Erin and Emma found that too, but as you were reading them and just wanted to make sure that there was parity in your marks across them, you could actually have two side by side, so that you could compare, make sure your marks were fair across the board, which I found really, really useful. And yeah, I'd agree also about that, ability to kind of express any concerns about stories and send them on, knowing that you hadn't just left them in the ether, that there was somebody else who'd have a look at them, which I found really reassuring, I must admit. And Tom as well, a sort of question really about AI and stories written by AI, and obviously that's something that must be on teachers' radars as well. And how have you dealt with that, or how are you planning to deal with that as that becomes more of a thing?
So I think that was a challenge for the team for really the first time last year. Now, all of our stories, if anything's getting put through to that second round, everything gets put through a plagiarism check to make sure that we're not having sort of whole as I say, you're able to take, a character. You could take Matilda and write the next adventures of Matilda in 500 words. You just couldn't do a retelling of that story. But we'll use a plagiarism check to make sure that there aren't huge passages of books that have been lifted and put in the children's entries. But we're also running them through an organisation who are checking for AI generated stories as well. So they're able to give us a sort of a percentage confidence of how much that story will have been produced by an AI machine, and so I believe the team were looking at that last year, and they did pick out a number of stories that were clearly very, very high degree of confidence that had been simply produced by ChatGPT and copied over. I think someone have even left in the "sure, here's one for you" prompt that you might get at the start of that, which meant that we didn't really need the software to be able to tell case or not. But we are aware it's something that is being used more and more, because and so we have got those measures in place. It's a very complicated system that we use with that third party, but they improve the software that they use on a day by day, week by week basis to be able to get it as AI improves as well. So we are confident all the stories that made it through to the top 50 last year and the 5,000 the reading agency stage, that they were all the work of children. They were all genuine attempts.
Thank you. And do you have provision to accept stories in Braille, Jane is asking?
I saw a question from Jane. Thank you for sending it. Unfortunately, we don't have provision for that at this stage. We also don't have, we have been asked as well in the past if we have the provision to accept stories in that aren't written in English, and we're not able to accept those either due to the judges that we have available to be able to read things. We know that we can lose some of the nuance from things if we were to simply translate them. So we don't have that set up. What we do have in place, and we have had support for visually impaired students who've been able to dictate their stories and have them typed up on their behalf. We had a visually impaired student who was one of our finalists in recent years as well. And what we will commit to doing is to be able to tailor any prizes, so that we know that at the moment the prizes that we get would be the main prize would be a bundle of books, and it went in varying different people's heights, the average height of a person in that age group that you've entered for. I think silver was the height of Her Majesty the Queen, and then gold was the height of Lenny Henry last year as well. But we will work with the publishers who very kindly donate books to us to make sure that books are appropriate to any impairments that any children who enter the competition have. The last thing we want to do is give somebody a prize that isn't going to be of any use to them and not particularly wanted. We want to foster that love of reading and writing. So we'll do what we can to work with the winners in that case to get them a suitable prize.
Thank you. And how long do judges have to read the stories?
Initially in that first phase, there's 3 weeks available. So it's very short. It's only a couple of days after the competition closes, that the stories will start to land into people's inboxes. It's then about 3 weeks or so for that first phase, and then we have a week in reserve for any stories that don't get through the initial round of judging, and when we put out that call for extra volunteers to help mop up the stories, so there's an extra week or so in place for that. But you will have all the initial stories in your batch. Your 10 stories you should receive within a couple of days of the competition closing, and then it's about 3 weeks that you've got in place then to get through those 10.
Thanks, Tom. And Matt said there'll be a step-by-step video available on the 500 Words website in September, which will explain the process and the system. So thank you for that. So we've also got a few suggestions for activities coming through that libraries might do. Louise, I saw your one about storyboarding. Do you want to, can you unmute and just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. When I had some family learning funding a few years ago, I did actually invite an author in. She was a local picture book author, mainstream published, and she got, you know, the classic divide the page up and then think through your story. Because when I've judged very local, you know, storytelling competitions, they don't know how to structure the story. You know, I work up in the very flat fens in Cambridgeshire where literacy levels are predominantly quite low, and exposure to, you know, books and stories, though we do our best. So it was actually helping them structure that story. And I suppose it's that bite size, if you excuse me using that expression in BBC's hearing, but it's just taking that story down into its component parts. And actually I was at ASCL conference, and we did something where, you know, it's like the Chinese whispers, you draw something and pass it on. We were making graphic novels, but this is the idea that you can just go think, that's a blank piece of paper and I've got to fill it with words. You think about each bit and then you can start joining it together, and obviously think about the word count. So that's all I was thinking.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I think, yeah, any of those kinds of activities that libraries can do to really inspire children to write. I think as a judge, I don't know if Emma and Erin would agree with this. The ones that I really liked when I was reading them were the ones that actually were able to structure the story well and ended up with a really positive, strong ending. And I think that's where I mean, often it's a challenge for all writers, isn't it, to get that ending right that really has a punch. And I mean, Spencer's story, particularly, you know, as a case in point, it had a brilliant, powerful ending. And that's what really struck me about children, that a lot of them were able to really get that kind of ending right, and that was what made the story.
Because often they get carried away and then they think, oh heck, I've got to end this. And actually some mainstream authors do the same. You think, did you run out of ideas? So yeah.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Emma or Erin, about that as well, from the ones that you judged?
I think so. I think I found the ones that were really easy to read were those that had the structure. And in past years, I'm sure I've read a few that I had to just sort of think, right, I need to read that again. I'm not quite sure what's happened, or have I missed a word or a sentence? But, you know, those are the ones that the child's literally just written and had a brilliant time writing and has maybe lost their train of thought somewhere. But yeah, the ones that are very clearly structured do make a lot of sense. And I think teachers across the UK do some work around this. I know they talk a lot about how to write a story sort of from a very early age in the curriculum. So, you know, children that have been sort of had that, or maybe teachers are prepping them to do this as an activity, you can tell the ones that have been sort of given some time and thought into their story.
And support, yeah. Any thoughts from you, Emma?
I think I'd echo that. It's, you know, it's definitely makes a big difference if the structure is there.
Yeah.
Whether or not they've been sort of coached to some degree in school. But yeah, there was some, because you weren't quite sure you would understand that, then it does make it a whole lot easier and just naturally more enjoyable to read.
Yeah.
Say as
I'd
well
like-
on Louise's point about the storyboarding, we are working. I can't say who just yet because we've not signed everything, but we're working with a new partner hopefully this year, producing a series of resources talking very much about that, visualizing your story and then going on to write it. And Matt and our team's heading to film with them to be able to work on that, sort of putting the images down, sketching something out, and then being able to write around that story as well. So that's a lovely idea, Louise.
Mhm. And any thoughts you want to add, Becky, while you're
Well, it's interesting because the sort of analysis that we do is from the other end of the scale, because we don't really look at the stories individually one at a time. So it's different and separate from the judging system. We look at them, in sort of their component parts and compare how words are being used across lots of different stories, or how they start across lots of different stories or end. So it's fascinating to know that there's analysis at all ranges of the spectrum going on across the stories, and with looking at the language use in completely different ways as well.
No, thank you. And just looking at the comments, and Jane's talked about talking about linking libraries and school library services in the schools, and actually this is a perfect opportunity, isn't it, to get school library services and libraries working together to support schools and support writing. And Tom, what's the kind of relationship between 500 Words and families, and families kind of supporting children to write their stories?
We know that the people who can submit a story on behalf of the child will be either a parent or guardian, and also regardless of who submits the story, you do have to have parental consent to be able to do so. So it's parents or guardians, and teachers have been the traditional routes, with the vast majority of entries coming from teachers. But we know that's placing a huge amount of pressure on them, because that could be up to 30, even more children in their class, having to type up that many stories and put them in. So we have expanded out the number of people that are able to submit a story this year as well, because we do know that a lot of the time that work will go home to parents, and a lot of them from the areas who don't engage with the BBC simply won't engage any further and won't want to submit that story, and then that story just never sees the light of day, sadly. So we have expanded it out. We've been able to get permission from the various departments of the BBC to control this, to allow, as we mentioned, those sports groups that we're working with, the sports. You'll see extra fields on the form if you're submitted this year for sports club leader. They're all very generic in description, and quite possibly deliberately so as well, to be a bit of a catch-all. But we've got sports club leader, but also community group leader. And it is our understanding, we feel, that if we're, and again, not wanting to put extra work on people, but that if there's a session that's taking place at a library, we feel that a librarian would come under that banner and be able to submit a story. As I say, they do need to be typed up. The information that you would need from somebody would be their name and their school, and just the tick box from a parent to say that they're happy for you to do so. But what we're doing is trying to produce a number of double-sided sheets that have got maybe some story ideas and some tips on one side, and then on the other side it's lined paper to allow the child to write the story. And if there's sessions that are being held in those sports clubs or in other places, we're making these resources available I believe we've got one from our friends at the OUP who've produced one as well, and we're putting these resources together to try and basically say, here it is, you can write this story now. You can take that home, and if your parent will type it up, that's brilliant. And we do talk to parents through some of our parent-facing platforms with the BBC to get them to get involved as well. But just trying to make it as easy as possible, because we do know it is a slight barrier having to type that story rather than scan it or post it to us. But we're just trying to speak to as many people as possible, so that we can try to increase those numbers that come through. We are aware that it's potentially a burden on people to do so, and we're very grateful for everyone's time to submit those stories for us.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, sort of widening access, making sure that everyone has. I know that's a real kind of driving force behind the 500 Words, is that every child, regardless of ability, has the opportunity to submit the stories if as much as is possible. And so I think libraries working with parents is a great way of kind of broadening access to the competition. So
and to give an example, going back to talking about Spencer's story, it was his teacher who had encouraged him to do that. It's not that his parents were discouraging him from writing, but his teacher really gave him that that nudge to be able to do it. And then he went home and said, I don't really want to write this up, and so just spoke it into his iPad and had it transcribed for him. So I think a lot of that might have been coming from a stream of consciousness, which you know is no great shame for the way that the story came out. So there's different approaches that we'll take for everybody, but we really do want the competition. You know, someone's story could be 50 words. You could write a terrific story in 50 words and get but we've all read an email that was 100 or 200 words longer than it needed to be. But you could write that great story in 50 words, and that could go on to be the winning story. We just want those ideas, those brilliant ideas. And it's great that everyone who gets through to the top 50, we have those stories read by people from the radio drama company at the BBC. So we're able to put those stories up, which then become classroom resources, and hopefully go on to encourage people to take part next year as well. And our friends at Bitesize, I know we're part of BBC Teach, which is very teacher focused. Over on Bitesize, they will speak. In a primary level, we know that the main target audience for Bitesize Primary is parents. If you've got a 6 or 7 year old who says, I want to learn some extra maths, and then keep hold of that child because you've got a good one there. But if you want to be, you know, we know that it's parents who are taking people onto those platforms. And so we do work with them as well to be able to get them to see that messaging as well across all the English and English guides that are on the website, and encourage people to start writing the stories, working with our parents department in Bitesize as well to speak to them. So we do try to put that message out to a number of different areas to be able to spread the message and to get people involved, and have resources on each of those platforms as well that will help you to get started or point you in the right direction. We've got some brilliant story starters on the BBC Teach website from another of our partners, Pobble, who've put together some sort of loose themes for how you might want to start to shape your story, or like an opening sentence at an older age group that you could then carry it on with and go in whatever direction you want. So there are lots of great resources to hopefully encourage people to get involved.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and you can see those sort of class visits in libraries with story starters, or using the inspiration of being in the library as a story starter. There's lots you could do. And on the chat, Erin's talked about, you know, the importance of promoting this. I think, you know, libraries also have a big role in just pushing out the 500 words competition through their social media posts and so on, and promoting to schools as well. And James had a suggestion for an online writers in residence for each region to help support young writers with their work, which would be fantastic. And so this is something that publishers may be able to support. It's definitely a great idea to have some writers in residence supporting children during that time. So thank you. Oh, I think we've covered everything. Does anyone have any final questions before we finish? I don't want to miss anybody.
Just on that point about posters, we are putting the finishing touches to posters to get people to sign up to take part and sign up for judges as well. We'll be able to share those resources, and we're happy for them to be used far and wide. And we also do share with Libraries Connected and our other partners a lot of suggested social posts. And you know, the more the merrier. We'll be delighted for them to be shared out as well. If I don't answer another question, just to say now, thank you so much for everybody for engaging with our project, because it's something that means a lot to us at the BBC, and we're really grateful for everybody's support at whatever level you're able to give it. So thank you, and hopefully we see lots more entries and lots of judges this year.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. And so, yeah, it's 14:59, so we're due to close. But I just wanted to thank you all for your questions and comments in the chat, but also to thank our speakers, to Emma Davis, Erin Hamilton, and Tom, and also Matt and Chris from the BBC, and also Dr. Rebecca Lawrence. And thank you for that insight, Rebecca. It was really fascinating to hear all of that. It's amazing to think all those stories that sort of captured and being analysed all the time. So yeah, huge thank you. Also thank you to Emma, Daniel, and Libraries Connected, who kind of keeps everything moving along behind the scenes. So thank you for coming, and have a great rest of the day. And if the speakers don't mind hanging on for a second, that'd be great. And everyone else is free to go. Thank you very much.